Hello everyone, I'm Kenshin, welcome to History Talk. Today's historical discussion is about the fall of Sevastopol. Please take a moment to subscribe, like, comment, and share. Also, don't forget to turn on the notification bell. As the Russo-Ukrainian War entered its third year, Putin gradually restored and even strengthened military production with support from the CCP. Ukraine was determined to reclaim Crimea, and there was no way around it. They had to capture the Black Sea fortress, Sevastopol. But was it really impregnable? Let's go back to World War II and examine the German Nazi offensive. First, let's understand that the Crimean Peninsula is a crucial strategic point in the Black Sea region. Russia fought 9 wars with Turkey in the 17th century and a Crimean War in the mid-19th century involving the UK, France, Turkey, and Austria to secure control over the area. This illustrates its significance. Sevastopol, the fortress city on the peninsula, was crucial during World War II. The Soviet Union deployed aircraft that could attack coastal countries along the Black Sea, putting pressure on pro-German countries like Romania and Bulgaria. Moreover, it directly threatened the Ploiesti oil fields, a lifeline for Germany, making it a thorn in Hitler's side. Naturally, he wanted to eliminate this problem. Capturing Sevastopol would not only eliminate the threat but also potentially influence Turkey to lean towards Germany, which would be advantageous. To protect this strategic location, the Soviet Union built numerous bunkers, fire points, and trenches centered around Sevastopol. They constructed 4 lines of defense with 12 permanent fortress groups equipped with battleship-grade twin-gun turrets. It's hard to imagine that these turrets were protected by armor plates 300 centimeters thick, encased in 4 meters of concrete. The fortresses were interconnected by tunnels and underground railways, forming a cohesive defense. Additionally, knowing the German army's route, the Soviet Union deployed strong defensive works in the vital Perekop Isthmus. The optimal time for Nazi Germany to attack Sevastopol would have been when the Battle of Kiev ended in September 1941. At that time, the defenses in Crimea were weak, but Nazi Germany was concentrated in Moscow with only 7 infantry divisions, far from sufficient. The Soviet Union's repulsion of the Nazis allowed him the opportunity to reinforce their defenses. By January 1942, when Germany suffered heavy losses during the failed Operation Typhoon to capture Moscow, and the battlefront became deadlocked, Hitler changed his strategic direction. He ordered Manstein to lead the 11th Army Group to attack the Crimean Peninsula. Manstein did not rush the attack. After careful observation of the fortifications, he realized that while there were only 3 fortresses in the south and west, which the German army had taken in 1941, the presence of the Air Force here could effectively provide fire support. Moreover, the mountainous terrain was unsuitable for the deployment of armored and artillery units, making it a less favorable option. On May 8, 1942, with the support of the Luftwaffe, the attack was launched. Manstein first deployed the super heavy guns, Dora, Karl, and Gustav. As the bombardment began on June 5, 1942, a deafening roar shook the Sevastopol Soviet defenses. 4 huge craters, each the size of a football field, appeared on the Sevastopol Soviet positions, along with large sections of buildings and 30-meter deep defensive works instantly reduced to rubble. Other large-caliber artillery shells penetrated a 10-meter thick concrete defensive structure, triggering the explosion of an ammunition depot, leading to a chain reaction of intense explosions that directly sank a ship in the bay. During the 12 days from June 5 to 17, the Gustav fired a total of 48 shells, destroying multiple gun batteries named Stalin and Siberia. This immensely fortified fortress was utterly devastated by the German bombardment. In the face of the super-heavy Gustav cannon, there was hardly any structure in Sevastopol that could withstand the onslaught. With the support of 203 artillery battalions, the plan was to breach the strongest defenses of the northern front in one fell swoop, aiming to destroy the fortress head-on. This approach allowed the Germans to avoid the Soviet naval and air forces. Additionally, the northern front was situated in a plain, facilitating the deployment of super-heavy artillery and artillery clusters. Breaking through the defense line was also advantageous for the German armored units, while the remaining fortress guns would lose their effectiveness due to their fixed positions. As Manstein led the 11th Army Group to sweep through the Crimean Peninsula and approached the walls of Sevastopol, the Soviet Union dispatched the 44th and 51st Army Groups to cross the Kerch Strait with the aim of supporting the Crimean Peninsula. In response, Manstein decisively abandoned the siege of Sevastopol and changed his objective to support the Soviet troops. Faced with the Soviet naval and air superiority, he deployed a small number of troops to feign resistance against the Soviet forces breaking out from the fortress, while the rest of his forces gathered on the Kerch Peninsula. Instead of engaging the main Soviet forces head-on, Manstein chose to bypass them and swiftly cut through the weakest flank of the Soviet defenses, rapidly penetrating the Soviet center from within, thereby disintegrating their forces. In just 10 days, they nearly annihilated 3 times their own enemy forces, capturing 170,000 Soviet soldiers and opening the gates of Sevastopol wide. With the crisis on the Kerch Peninsula thoroughly resolved after several months, Manstein turned his attention to dealing with the Soviet forces inside the Sevastopol fortress. He then quietly transferred his main forces from the Kerch Peninsula and left only a small number of troops to monitor the garrison. In the early hours of June 29, Manstein sent assault teams to secretly cross the Sevastopol Bay from the southern shore, scaling the rocky cliffs, and launched a surprise attack on the rear of the Soviet positions. Under the cover of artillery fire, the main German forces launched a large-scale assault, trapping the Soviet troops in the city in a pincer movement. But the myriad of defenses still inflicted heavy casualties on the German infantry. Manstein later recalled, "Whether it was a large stronghold or a small bunker, the Soviet troops often fought to the last man and the last bullet." The Soviet performance was unparalleled in tenacity, fiercely defending every fortress and trench, requiring bloody battles to capture each one. After repeated engagements, the severe shortage of German troops became apparent. Although Manstein sought some reinforcements from Hitler, the Soviet reinforcements outnumbered them. Eventually, most of the generals advised Manstein to abandon further attacks. However, he sternly rebuked them, stating that victory hung on the edge of the bayonet, and it was a test of whose willpower was strong enough. Sevastopol, being a fortress city, was divided into 2 layers, above ground and underground. The vast underground spaces allowed Soviet troops and civilians to retreat and continue living, with underground factories providing weapons and ammunition for the defenders. Moreover, the intricate maze of tunnels and passages meant that the German forces would incur heavy losses if they attempted to completely annihilate the defenders. Recent examples, like the Malibu steel plant, led Manstein to believe that forcing surrender was the best option. As we all know, the key to boosting the defenders' confidence in a siege is a steady stream of external support, which encourages them to continue their resistance. For instance, during the siege of Leningrad in World War II, the Soviet troops and civilians managed to endure for 900 days, with over 1.5 million deaths, mainly because the German forces found it difficult to sever all the supply routes to Leningrad. After breaking through the northern defense line of the Soviet army and repelling the Soviet reinforcements, Manstein did not immediately order an attack on the city center of Sevastopol. Instead, he broke through the Soviet fortresses set up in the east, west, and south directions from the rear. After clearing out all the Soviet troops surrounding the city and cutting off the Soviet supply routes from the sea, he chose to subject Sevastopol's city center to massive artillery bombardment, destroying all the buildings and forcing the Soviet defenders to retreat entirely underground. The German Gustav gun demonstrated its ability to destroy Sevastopol's underground facilities. With dwindling supplies and life-threatening conditions, the Soviet defenders finally agreed to surrender on July 3, 1942. On July 4, over 90,000 remaining Soviet troops retreated to the tip of the peninsula. Realizing that naval support was hopeless, they surrendered to the German forces, who captured 460 cannons and countless other spoils of war. In this battle, Manstein commanded the German 11th Army Group, facing a situation where he did not have numerical superiority in troops, air force, or navy. Despite this, the German casualties amounted to only 24,000, while the Soviet losses were around 240,000. This victory over the supposedly invincible Sevastopol created a miracle in the history of military affairs, leading to Manstein's promotion to Field Marshal by Hitler for his conquest of the Crimean Peninsula. Returning to the present, regardless of how many defense works Russia has in this fortress city or how fierce the artillery fire is, taking a cue from Manstein's strategy, cutting off the supply routes and potential support from other directions can lead to victory without the need for a frontal assault. This is why Ukraine is requesting missile support from Germany, targeting the Crimean Bridge to cut off Russia's supply lines. Especially in modern warfare, victory is not achieved by piling up human lives but by information and high technology. The Russian military, still using World War II thinking, and even Putin, may have to taste failure here again. If you enjoyed the content of the program, liking, subscribing, and sharing would be the best support. If you have any suggestions, please leave a comment, and we will interact with you. See you in the next episode.